I am Barbra Dillon, Editor-in-Chief of Fanbase Press, and I'm honored to be joined today by a wonderful and knowledgeable group of panelists to discuss the importance of graphic medicine in comics and how these visual stories pertaining to the discourse of medicine have allowed us to examine the essentials of human existence, to understand ourselves better, and to connect with one another through empathy and compassion. As I mentioned, I have a wonderful group of individuals who are going to be speaking on this topic today, so I'd like to introduce each one. I will add a caveat that we will be joined partway through by another panelist, so I will introduce her up front, and then she will join us a little bit later. But first, let me start with Matthew Noe. Matthew is the lead collection and knowledge management librarian at Countway Library, Harvard Medical School, and a part-time instructor at the University of Kentucky in the School of Information Science. Matthew came to graphic medicine during grad school and has never looked back, building multiple library collections, developing book club programs, and developing countless opportunities for professional development. He led and co-authored a scoping review on comics and health education and co-developed the Essential Graphic Medicine Annotated Bibliography. He is currently president of the ALA Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable and a 2020 ALA Emerging Leader. He also serves as a director on the Worcester Public Library's Board of Directors. Matthew, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That is quite a biography. It's amazing. You do so many amazing things, Matthew. As I mentioned, we're going to be joined a little bit later by Dr. Theresa Rojas. Theresa is a writer, editor, artist, and professor of English at Modesto Junior College, where she teaches literature, creative writing, composition, and comparative media with a specialty in post-1945 comic studies and visual culture. Her chapbook of poetry and illustrations, Don't Ask Me, debuted in 2019. She is also the creator and editor-in-chief of Calacas, an art, literature, and comics anthology zine, and the founding director of the Latinx Comic Arts Festival. She is also a member of the Graphic Medicine Board of Directors. And again, Theresa will be joining us very shortly. We are also joined by Jordan Hart, who is the author of the hair metal humor book, Steel Rainbow, Doppelganger, and the science fiction graphic novel Terminarch from Awesome Comics. He's also written feature articles for the Huffington Post, Guitar World, and Geek Exchange. His upcoming graphic medicine comic book series, Ripple Effects, will be published by Fanbase Press in 2022. Hello, Jordan.
Hello, glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us. And last but certainly not least, we have Mike An and Seol Young Lee, who are the creative team behind the 5-issue comic book series Out of Order. With Seol as the writer and Mike as the artist, Out of Order tells the story of their relationship, how they deal with mental illness, and how they hope to raise awareness for and destigmatize mental illness. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks.
Of course, absolutely. Always great to chat with everyone here on this panel. And we're going to be discussing graphic medicine quite a bit, obviously, since that is the topic of this panel. So I always feel that it's helpful to define it for our viewers up front. So for those who may be unfamiliar, what is graphic medicine? And what are some examples of comics that fall within this genre? Matthew, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So, I mean, broadly, like graphic medicine is just comics about anything related to healthcare or medical topics. The formal, like academic-y definition we use is the intersection of the medium of comics and the discourse of healthcare. So it can be pretty narrow or pretty broad, depending on how you define healthcare and/or comics. Like it's one of those big questions that we grapple with all the time. Like more and more, we're including climate comics as part of graphic medicine because it's going to impact everyone's health, and it already is. And so like that's a broadening of what we normally think of in terms of healthcare. But so comics that fall in that genre are all kinds of things, like, Mom's Cancer by Brian Fees is usually the one I go to most quickly. I have a pile of books that just arrived like this week sitting next to me. So some examples, we've got Dirty Biology, the X-rated story of the science of sex. That's graphic medicine. We've got a comics anthology called You Died. And so there's all kinds of stuff in there. And then, Alison Bechdel, The Secret to Superhuman Strength, and her other works often fall into graphic medicine as well. So there's all kinds of examples. Those are just ones I literally had next to me already.
I think that's a great jumping off point, Matthew, and thank you for those examples as well. And for Seol and Mike and Jordan, you are creators working on your own series or ready to release your own series. Were you familiar with the term graphic medicine before diving into your series, or now that you have created these series, what have you learned about it? Seol and Mike, why don't we start with you?
Oh, actually, we had no idea. And I was actually, I don't want to sound ignorant, but when you invited us to this panel, that's when we actually looked it up. And we were so surprised because we were like, oh, our book fits so perfectly in that genre, because our comic book is based on a true story. It's about our relationship. Mike has had paranoid schizophrenia for over 20 years now. So yeah, we're very new to this genre.
And Jordan, what about you?
Same, actually. It was actually through you and Fanbase Press that gave me the illumination into this wonderful program and organization. And as soon as I started diving in, just like Seol and Mike, it's fascinating and it's awesome, everything that's going on. So glad to be part of it.
Excellent. And I'm going to give sort of a definition when referring to graphic medicine that the U.S. National Library of Medicine has offered. And that is, quote, the combined language of words and pictures that is the comic medium gives approachability and emotional impact to these personal stories and even to the clinical data they sometimes include, end quote. So as creators and educators who work to share stories with readers, why do you feel that graphic medicine comics are so valuable and connect so strongly with readers, and how do you feel that they help to offer greater representation for readers as well? Matthew, why don't we start with you again?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so it's kind of comes back to the power of the medium of comics, right? So, it's one thing to read about something, and it's another thing to watch a movie or an animated clip about it, but the combination, when you put the story in words and the story in images together, it draws you in, and you've got a level of control over the story and the pace of the story as a reader, and so you're filling in the gutter gaps, and you're like, oh, this is what's happening in the story, and then those pauses give a chance for someone to dive in and imagine themselves in that experience, to kind of connect with the story that's being told in a way that you don't necessarily get in other mediums. And yeah.
And Jordan, what about you? You are so knowledgeable. To me, I've learned so much from you about the comics medium as a whole, and you know everything back to the golden and silver age of comics as well. What can you speak to as a creator, as a storyteller, in terms of being able to convey these stories and really impact readers with the messages that you're putting forward?
Yeah, I think any story from the beginning of humankind is about life, right? No matter what the medium, stories are about life, and I feel like comics are just such a great way into that. And I feel like that was what Stan Lee and Jack Kirby at Marvel really understood when they started Marvel, and why Marvel is what it is now. That people aren't perfect, people have flaws, people have illnesses. That's something that every reader can relate to, even if they don't have that particular illness or that particular flaw. They probably know someone that does, and they can connect with it. And I think because of that, it's just that connection. You can really, touch your readers, connect with the creators by doing that. And comics are just such a great visual medium, right? It's hard to tell what's going on in a movie if it's muted. It's obviously, if you are blind or have bad sight, you're not going to know what's going on in a novel. But a comic book, you could read just the dialogue and know what's going on, or you could strip all the dialogue and look at all the art and know what's going on. And I feel, to me, comics are one of the only mediums that really can do that. So I feel like it's just, you can get a lot into each page.
Absolutely. And Mike and Seol, in being so vulnerable of sharing your own story with readers, I'm sure that you have at conventions or other events when you have had one-on-one interactions with readers, I'm sure that you've seen the immense impact that your story has had on readers. Do you want to speak to what those experiences might have been like and what that has meant to you in being able to show representation for mental illness?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, after we came out with the story and, self-published our books, and yeah, as you say, started going out to conventions and speaking to people and pitching, just, like trying to sell our comic books and, giving us a short pitch. And it was so shocking to us how many people would say, oh, I have some kind of mental illness, or I know somebody who does. So it was just as shocking to us, because that's not what we were expecting.
Yeah, we didn't really know what to expect going into it, but then to see that reaction, it was, yeah, it's something that I think people deal with, but it's not much often talked about openly, and because of the stigma and stuff like that. But yeah, we were really surprised, and we were kind of in a pleasant kind of a way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think with what we're talking about with the comic medium of art, being able to tell our story through art is in that unique way is really special for us. Because, for example, when I wrote the story and he illustrated it because it's about what happened in our relationship. But when he illustrated the parts, when I saw the illustrations he made of, because he has hallucinations, so that the things that he sees, even though he's told me before, what he sees, but when he illustrated it, I was just like, oh, so that's what you see. So it was, even for me, even though I wrote the story, when he illustrated it, it was like a new revelation. Yeah.
It's amazing how impactful sharing your story can be and can really serve to benefit all of us, whether you're someone reading the story and taking in the story or just being able to process it in a different way in putting the story out there. So thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. Matthew, I want to come back to you, given that you and Theresa, who again will be joining us shortly, given that you're board members for the Graphic Medicine International Collective, what can you share with us about the work that you do to guide and support the use of comics in health?
Yeah, so I'll jump in on that. But I just want to say this process of being vulnerable and sharing is powerful for on the reader side too. So we use I'm in a medical school setting, and so sometimes I'll have book discussions with medical students and bring them together, and we'll read comics about depression. And for anyone not watching, you might not know, like medical students face significant mental health struggles, and they're not allowed to be open about it because if they are, they risk being kicked out of their programs. Still to this day, still that can happen. And so giving them this opportunity to read about someone going through this and then sharing that and then making it okay to talk about it in that space has been really powerful to be a part of. And I think it's genuinely helping our students be more open and true to themselves in an environment that's not always welcome. So I just had to throw that out there when I was listening to you all talk. I just kept coming back to that. But no, so the Graphic Medicine International Collective. So graphic medicine has existed for more than a decade now as a conference running organization. We became a little more official 2 years ago, becoming a nonprofit. But so our mission is to guide and support the use of comics, and we do that by we hold the conference, and this year an unconvention where we're doing it digitally. We run the graphic medicine website, graphicmedicine.org, where we are constantly getting email contacts from people who either have already created a story and want to feature it on our site. So we do reviews and these spotlight posts where people can say, hey, look at this cool thing I'm doing, and then bring it to the world. We've got a program going on right now where 2 other board members, Alex Thomas and Michael Green, are coordinating cartoonists and frontline workers to tell the stories that they have from the pandemic. And so it's a lot of building connections and raising awareness of things. Really, Like we don't want to be controlling. We try to tell people what they can and can't do. It's just we want to bring everyone together because, you know, how often do cartoonists think about what doctors are doing, and how often do doctors think about what cartoonists are doing? So we're here to bridge that gap, kind of.
It's amazing. And your work is immensely appreciated. I think that a lot of times organizations that do work to raise awareness have such an uphill battle because folks may not be familiar, you know, with, like, even, you know, folks on this call may not be familiar with the term graphic medicine. So it's amazing work that you're doing, and very much appreciated. I want to give a shout out to Dr. Theresa Rojas, who has now joined us. Hello, Theresa. Thank you so much for joining us. We did an introduction of your amazing credits earlier in the panel, but we're so honored that you could join us.
Thank you. There may be a cameo from a little niece or nephew in any moment now.
Not to worry. These are pandemic times, and we roll with the punches no matter what. Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. I would like to turn towards our creators for a few minutes to talk about their series and the stories that they're sharing. Jordan, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you. And your upcoming series, Ripple Effects, explores life as a superhero with an incurable disease. I'm curious what sets this series apart. Is a positive person-first representation about life with a chronic disease, which just so happens to also include superhuman abilities. So I'm curious about your inspiration behind this series and what you hope that it offers to readers.
Sure. Yeah, so the quick synopsis of Ripple Effects is that the main protagonist, George, he is invincible to external harm, so he can't be hurt. He's bulletproof, flame-proof. He's invincible, like in every way that we know it. But at the same time, he has type 1 diabetes. So while nothing externally can hurt him, internally, he could die if he doesn't monitor his glucose and stay on top of everything. So the inspiration from that story came from personal experience. I have thrombophilia, which is a incurable blood clotting disorder. And it is a chronic illness, an invisible illness. And growing up, X-Men was my favorite comic book, and I wished every day to be a mutant. That was like, went to bed every night, I want to be a mutant. And then when I was 25, I became one. My blood mutated and I got my blood clotting disease. So I was in the hospital at the time and reading comics just, you know, to stay positive. And I was like, that would be a great story, like an invincible superhero that is chronically ill. So at a high level with the story, it's a lot of my personal experience of living with a chronic illness. And it focuses a lot on the internal monologue. There's a lot of captions. So it's like, while we have the superhero story on the outside, we're getting a lot of George, the main character's feelings and anxiety and concerns through the narration, because having a chronic illness, there's just a lot of things that come with it. You know, anxiety is a major thing. Medical debt is a major thing. For me, for a very long time, it was not wanting people to know that I was ill, because I noticed people would treat me differently, not in a bad way, but I didn't want to be known as the sick friend, as the ill friend, where it was just like, I'm not defined by my illness. And sometimes it's just, people mean well, but it's just, you know, if they don't know firsthand, it's a little tough for them. So that is just really the core of Ripple Effects, is that you could be chronically ill, but you're not defined by it. It doesn't make who you are. And a lot of times in movies, I feel like that's not the case. I feel like if there's a sick character, it's this obstacle that has to be defeated and overcome, or unfortunately in the story, they pass, they die. And then it's like, you get it that way. So I just wanted to write a story about someone that was chronically ill, that just like everyone is living a normal life, and it's just a part of their life, but it is not their life. And I'm sorry, that was a very long-winded answer.
No,
but...
goodness, no, not at all.
Can I just say, I'm so excited for this work. And as a fellow diabetic, I'm type 2. but I'm now insulin dependent, and so that switch over to injection, and part of that experience is deciding when it's okay to inject, like in front of other people, and how you decide to create a community. So when I first was switched over, because your body, when you're type 2, you start with pills and that sort of thing, and then eventually your body's like, no, I really need insulin. And that was a weird thing for me, is getting to the injection part, but the part where I'm like, we're out to dinner, do I need to excuse myself, do I need to the point now where people, especially close to me, they just know, they'll remind me. I love that. They're like, did you, and I'm like, oh yeah, I did it. They're like, when did you do it? Just now, under the table. They didn't even notice. Good, we're good. We're good to go.
That's
but
great.
All of those like questions of when is it okay? And if someone's in my home, do I need to go to another room, kind of thing? And I think it's amazing how accepting people are, but it's so easy to want to hide it, right? And to want to not tell your story, not tell people that you're ill or that you have to, inject. And one of the things that my friends like to say is, have you shot up? I'm like, I guess we can say that among friends. That's a little weird, but sure. I have. It's insulin. It's insulin, people. It's okay. Don't tell anyone.
That's great.
Oh, well, thank both of you, Theresa and Jordan, for sharing your stories, and Jordan for putting that new series into the world for others to be impacted by. And Mike and Seol, I'd like to turn to you and to your series, Out of Order. Again, this is not only your heartfelt personal story, but also an opportunity to talk about and destigmatize mental health in general. So for each of you, what inspired you to tell this story, and what do you hope that readers will take away from it?
You want to start?
Yeah, it's just so amazing how when we're listening to Jordan's story, that even though we're talking about like something completely different, like completely different illnesses, how much we can relate. Because a big part of why we decided to come out with our story was because we were sick of hiding it. We were sick of hiding it from, like, we had been married at the time for 9 years, but we still hadn't told my side of the family that he has paranoid schizophrenia, because we were afraid of being judged. And when we got married, my parents knew something was wrong, but we thought that if we came out with the actual illness, that they would even more so be against our getting married. And even from my friends, they knew that he had paranoid schizophrenia, but I would never really go into details about like his symptoms or what I was going through. So we were very much in like a dark place. It was just me and him, because we wouldn't talk about it to anybody else. But we were finally like, what what can happen? What's the worst that can happen if we come out with our story? And with Theresa talking about how accepting people actually can be when you just are open and honest about it. It has been really surprising that people are accepting. And in retrospect, I was so afraid of people judging us, but at the same time, if we don't talk about what paranoid schizophrenia is, what it's like, then even though, like Jordan said, they mean well, they will have these misconceptions. So we've realized that we actually have a responsibility for talking about it, and being open about it. If we really want to destigmatize, if we're saying that that's our goal, then it's kind of our responsibility, because we really know how it is.
Yeah, and to answer your question about why we decided to put our story into a comic book form, things had been so bad for me and Seol for incredibly a long time. It was so bad that I'm not sure how much I should tell you guys, but it was just really dark and really bad for years and years. And so we finally decided, when we did decide we wanted to make a comic book, one of the big reasons was that we wanted to kind of put a positive spin on so all of this bad stuff that had happened, you know, we wanted to turn it into something good, something positive, something that might help other people, and maybe at least to understand if, or maybe if someone's ill, maybe they could read it and see and think in their mind, well, you know, I'm not alone, and that help is out there, and that people do care, and so that's kind of the reason why we did it. Also, yeah.
And to stay with you, Mike and Sol, for a moment, and you touched on this a little bit earlier in the discussion, but I just want you to speak to, given that you did go through such a dark time, do you feel that sharing this story and seeing its impact has helped both of you as well?
Yeah, definitely. Just knowing that there are other people like us out there, and also knowing that there are so many organizations out there who you know, their whole organization is is to support people with mental illness. But when we were just keeping to ourselves, and obviously Mike was going to a psychiatrist, but other than that, we weren't really getting help. And I never thought of getting help for myself as a caretaker, even though looking back, I was so depressed, and because I couldn't talk about it with, or I felt like I couldn't talk about it with anyone, it never even occurred to me to get help for myself. But when we started making connections, I think that was one of the biggest benefits, or one of the biggest things that happened that we weren't expecting. We made so many connections with organizations. And we're like, I was just like, oh, there was help out there all this time. And, you know, I was just suffering alone. So yeah, definitely it's been helpful for us too as creators.
I'm so glad to hear that. And Jordan, you as well. You're, you know, obviously this story hasn't yet reached readers, but will next year. What has the experience of just getting this story out in the open and processing it been like for you?
It's been really great for me personally. So the reason I chose type 1 diabetes as opposed to thrombophilia, which I have, is just that it was a little bit too close to home for me to write about, I think, first off. And then one of my very close friends has had type 1 diabetes since he was a child. He got it, I believe, when he was 6 years old. So I was able to have a resource, you know, we really commiserated in each other a lot because we worked together and he was my work partner. So, you know, we would always find comfort with each other. But then with writing the story, it was so great to have him as a resource and like to take his story and his inputs and kind of combine it with mine and create this new type of story. So that's been great for me personally. And then just like Mike and Sol were saying, like I hope that when it comes out, it shows people that they are not alone, that there are people there like them, that how they feel and what they're going through, everyone in that similar situation feels the same way, because that's how I felt talking to my friend about his type 1 diabetes.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing that. I appreciate it immensely. I want to transition back to Theresa and Matthew for a few minutes to talk about the Graphic Medicine International Collective, because as we mentioned earlier, this August, you'll be hosting a virtual convention in lieu of the in-person annual convention and calling it the Unconvention. So what details would you like to share about what we can anticipate from this event? Theresa, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, we have just closed the call for videos, and we have so many entries. Should I call them entries? Should I call them submissions? That's what I need, submissions. And it's just, it's wonderful. It's overwhelming and amazing and fabulous to see how many submissions. I think it was it over 100? Is that right? I think so.
Yeah, I haven't seen the final number, but it's definitely
yeah, it's
north
100
of 100.
something, and you know, and that's what we have to review. And I've seen a few of the videos so far, including Jordan's and Fanbase, that one, and I was so excited to see that. I forgot the question already. What can we expect? Oh, like, I don't know what we can, sorry. And Matthew, if you could chime in, I'm not actually sure what we can say and what we can't say other than lots of submissions, and it's going to be exciting. And there will be surprises. And
yeah, so I can say that, so the theme of the conference we went with this year was, what are you working on?
Yeah.
Just because, you know, we didn't have any sort of meeting in 2020. Normally we have an annual conference every year over the summer, and in 2020 it just, everything was happening so fast that we couldn't make that transition to virtual work, with all of the board members' lives in upheaval too. And so this year we were like, well, we haven't heard from anybody for a while, so let's find out what everyone's been up to. And, you know, we've got this, doing it in a virtual way, asking people to limit their videos to like a minute, just say, give us an update. Then we can hear from so many more voices than we normally can in an in-person conference. You know, there's no travel fees. There's no like, I have to get to another country. 2020 was going to be in Canada. The year before was in the UK. We are an international group, so we try to bounce around. But so that it limits who can attend. So a virtual event lets us widen things. Oh, I should say, so it's happening, the Unconvention is happening in August, August 13th through 15th. And so in the spirit of a collective and trying to bring everyone together, you know, we're making this it's a free event. We're asking people to, you know, pay what you can kind of model. Because we are a nonprofit, we don't have a, you know, we don't have an unlimited amount of funding, but we also want to make it so that people can actually attend, and as many people can attend as possible. So yeah. You can find all the details on the Graphic Medicine website, though.
Graphicmedicine.org. That's important. But I think that this is, it's important to point out exactly what Matthew just said, and that is that we wanted to make sure that it was accessible. So we wanted to have shorter videos, right? But also we talked a lot about the cost and how some conventions have come back virtually and they're quite expensive. I mean, there have been some I haven't been able to attend because I'm like, this is virtual. Why does it cost as much as being there? And in the spirit of community, that's something that we're always working on. The Graphic Medicine International Collective, that's very important to us. And this idea of reconnection, I feel like this upcoming conference is very much a primer for our in-person, but also to see, you know, what has come of this last year, both in terms of what are you working on, but what have you been struggling to work on? I think we're going to see some of that as well. And that's really important to point out that not everyone has been like, oh, look, I have so much time, I can do all the things now. I think, you know, in my own life, it's been sort of flipped where I'm like, I can't do any more of the things. So I thought good, but not so much. So it's going to be really exciting, and I hope everyone will join us for that.
Yeah, and I just, this kind of ties into the previous conversation. But I just wanted, the accessibility pieces, you know, being able to do it virtually allows people who can't necessarily travel to get there too, like for health reasons. Like that's not always been the case for conventions. Like, so I see a comic I should have mentioned earlier. There's this Israeli Strange series. Like there's one called Pain is Really Strange. And I wish I had it like 10 years ago. So I have a chronic pain condition where like some of my nerves just do not work. And so I used to, you know, walk around with a cane and everything. I don't need it now. But this, everyone was talking about the invisibility part of illness. Like the cane was awful and needing it was awful. But then people like gave you some birth and gave you some, you know, there was a level of attention to it. But when it's invisible, like, and you mentioned needing some sort of accommodation, it just becomes this kind of fight, and you have to constantly remind everybody and ask, and it's just this whole other experience that, comics give voice to that. And, you know, you can hand it to somebody and say, hey, this is kind of what it's like for me every day. Read this, and maybe then we can talk about it a little more, and maybe you'll understand better. But so the tie into the convention part is that, you know, we've heard from people in the past that, you know, they can't do these long trips, you know, for pain reasons or for accessibility of the building reasons. And so doing it virtually lets us reach that audience better as well.
And Theresa and Matthew, I think that you bring up really great points, each of you, in terms of, Theresa, you mentioned the sense of community, and then Matthew, the differences in ability differences that folks have when we're talking about graphic medicine as a whole, and just medicine overall, whether that is a physical difference, whether that is a neurological difference, whether there's a mental illness, an invisible disease of some sort. So I'm curious, with that sense of community in graphic medicine, and maybe we'll stick with Matthew and Theresa since you have the most knowledge of this genre, do you feel that there is anything still missing? Do you feel like there is room for growth in terms of graphic medicine, and where do you see that going?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my roles, I think, in the collective is to bring in sort of unheard voices. And this was an issue for me. I love the organization. I love being part of graphic medicine. I love working on graphic medicine. And I didn't intend to do that. It just sort of happened that the work I was doing, I was studying Linda Berry's work. And then she starts talking about neuroscience. I'm like, what's happening here? Wait, what? And then, and that sort of led to this whole beautiful thing. But the thing that I was bringing up and that I have mentioned to our collective is that I would go to conference after conference and say, okay, where are the brown people? You know, where are the stories of the brown people? And inevitably, I would often be the only brown person in the room, you know, not to mention the only brown woman in the room. And then people were trying to give me resources on, oh, well, if you read this, I'm like, no, wait, that's not what I mean. I've already read all the things. We need to bring them in, you know, we need to open up the forums and invite folks. And I think part of the issue is not so much, it's not an unwelcoming space at all. I want to be clear. I think graphic medicine, the folks who work on graphic medicine are some of the most, if not the most welcoming folks on the planet. And it's an amazing mix of cartoonists and scholars and comics folks and healthcare practitioners who also do all those different things as well. But I don't see still a lot of stories, particularly for me, my specialty is Latinx, right? So these stories, not only are there not a lot of them yet, but the ones that do live in the world right now are not well known. So this is a mission that I have, and which relates to a project that I'm working on that is a little slow going, but it's coming along. I just got a really good piece. It's an anthology called Somos, Latinx stories of trauma, illness, and healing. And this is important. I want to say this. Part of why it's slow going is that folks who said yes, as they're writing their stories and illustrating, are experiencing trauma. They're re-traumatizing. And so I've gotten several people who were like, you know what, I started this. I'm not ready to tell this story. I'm not ready to put it into the world. I'm having trouble finishing it. I'm having to process it. And so part of me wants to say, just do it, you know, just get it out, give it to me, I'll make sure it gets out. But at the same time, being very conscious of this is a very real thing. You know, people are dealing with death, people are dealing with domestic violence, with incarceration, things like that. And I'm like, okay, I have to honor that. This project's going to take a little bit longer because it's going to take as long as it's going to take. But in the end, we'll have the first of, I hope, many volumes of lots of people telling those stories. Because to jump back to what Seol and Mike were saying, it's hard to know how much to say, right? And how much to tell. But it's so important. A part of me wanted to jump in when you were speaking and say, tell me all the things, tell me everything. I want to know all of it. Not because, well, maybe a little partly because of I'm like, I just want to know, but also what can I connect with? You know, all these things. As these stories are coming across, we're connecting. And so I want more stories from people of color in graphic medicine to understand that in my culture and Latino culture, we're very much taught, and other cultures as well, but Latino culture is my experience, we don't talk about these things. When my mom was diagnosed with cancer, we're not telling anybody because then we're weak. And I'm like, but we need help. And as soon as we started talking about it, then all of a sudden, oh, so-and-so has cancer, so-and-so went through this, so-and-so went through that. So that is the core of the importance of all this work that's being done.
Matthew, anything you'd like to add?
I think Theresa, gave the best answer, to be honest. But from I come at this question a lot of times from the librarian mindset. So what do I have in my collection that I maintain, and what's missing, and what can I bring in? And so I've spent a few years like digging through comics backlists and trying to track down books that are out of print. There are a surprising number of things that we consider key core titles in graphic medicine that are out of print and not published anymore. And that's just a whole other thing. But I've built this collection up to try to cover, North American publishing for the last 30 years on graphic medicine. So now it's at the stage where, okay, that project is kind of there. I maintain it, buy the new things to come out, but it's good. So what's the next step? So I've been trying to figure out ways to bring in self-published and small press titles into the library collection. And that tends to be where I see so much more diversity of stories in self-published works than I do in mainstream published works, sorry, books just fell down on a bookcase. This room is surrounded by bookcases. But so like, those are stories that we need in the collection and for us to be able to highlight, because there are more voices writing and telling these stories in comics. They're just, they're not on a public or an academic library shelf because we buy from the same places all the time. So how can I buy from, an individual creator? And that's navigating this, bureaucratic system and making it work. But I'm also looking at expanding our collecting to beyond the English language here. So far, all I've been purchasing is in English. Over the summer, I'm putting together a proposal to start buying graphic medicine works in Spanish, because there are a plethora of them. There's a whole organization who I butcher the name every time because I don't speak Spanish. Medicina Grafica. They cover graphic medicine in Spanish, and it's a collective of people in Spain and in South and Latin America. And so like bringing all of those titles to readers in the US is the next big step. And then I want to look at all the manga. There is so much medical manga out there. It's just, it doesn't get translated very often. We've got Blackjack, we've got Cells at Work now. Cells at Work is amazing if you haven't read it. But like, how can we get more of those things in the US, both maybe in Japanese and translated? So that's kind of, I'm thinking at that angle too. Before I stop talking, last thing. I think, so I'm looking at the like 500 plus titles at the Countway Graphic Medicine collection right now. At least half of them are on some sort of mental health topic. Another large percentage is on cancer. So, and then there's smaller amounts of everything else. Diabetes has surprisingly few comics on it. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. And then, so like, we need to investigate ways to get a broader array of health topic stories being told beyond just the ones that are, again, I keep saying mainstream, and that's kind of what it is. It's what larger publishers tend to pick up in the stories that are in the news all the time. We need more variety of things. Sorry to keep running with it.
No, and I wanted to say, Matthew, for the record, I could listen to each of you for hours and hours. So no one ever needs to apologize on this panel about talking too much. Please share everything. Funny
could I say?
Yes, please. Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
I think like listening to you guys talking about this is like brings me so much hope. Because when we're just living and we don't hear about these things, when I come to a panel like this, it just ensures me that there are people who care and are working on this. And one of the most memorable groups that we've spoken to is a small group of Korean-speaking parents. So all these parents have children with who have paranoid schizophrenia. And when we told our story in like broken Korean, because we're not completely fluent, they were just so grateful and they were just so hungry to hear our story, because just like Theresa was saying, in the Asian culture too, we don't want to talk about it. Like, we're not supposed to talk about it. So they were asking so many questions, and when they saw that Mike's had it for a long time and he has been on this like recovery journey and he's creating comic books, they were just so thankful and just so, you know what I mean? They said that they were so hopeful. They had lost hope for their children, but hearing our story, it brought them back, that it renewed their hope and faith, that their children could get better in time, because it takes a lot of time. But yeah, just knowing that, oh, you guys are working on bringing in more language and stories and representation, that's just so great. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, sadly, we are coming to the end of this panel, but as always, I want our viewers to learn more about each of you, especially where they can find your work, or with Matthew and Theresa, where they can find resources that you've been working on through graphic medicine. So for each of you, where can we find you, whether it be website and or social media? Theresa, why don't we start with you?
So my Instagram handle is at Docteeroh, DOCTEEROH. But I would encourage folks to go to the graphicmedicine.org website, because you're going to find all things there. And my little bio is there now. And then folks can email if they just want to email with questions or to say hello or whatever to my school email. Excuse my nieces and nephews in the background. It's Rojas, TROJAS T @ Yosemite.edu, Yosemite like the park. And just send me an email to with whatever, and I will respond. I'm pretty friendly for the most part. So.
She is absolutely friendly all the time.
I was just saying, you seem extremely friendly.
Jordan, what about you? Why don't you go next?
Yeah, so Ripple Effects will be officially announced in a few weeks this summer, and then we will be releasing it in 2022. So it's a lot of prelim work for the rest of the year. But you can find me on Instagram at Jordy Jordith, is my handle. And then for more information, obviously fanbasepress.com, or like Dr. Theresa said, go to the graphic medicine website, because it is incredible. So please check that out.
Absolutely.
Matthew, what about you?
Yeah, so, third plug for the graphic medicine website. The easiest way to get me by email is to use our contact form on the website. Me trying to say my Harvard email address on here would take forever because it's this long. But if you can stomach some ranting politics and life in general, you can find me on social media pretty much all the time. It's at Know the Matt anywhere. So it's my last name and then Matt, or NOE the Matt. Like anywhere on social media, that's how to find me.
And I, for the record, thoroughly enjoy Matthew on social media, so definitely follow him. And again, last but certainly not least, Seol and Mike, where can we find you?
Yeah, we're probably the most active on Instagram, so just add Mike and Seol Comics. Yeah, and from there you can go, like in our bio, it has the website too, if you want to purchase our books or check out our books.
Excellent. Well, I want to say a huge thank you to all of you for participating in this conversation, and to use this word again, there's so much vulnerability in being willing to share your stories and helping others to share their stories. So I want to say a huge thank you to all of you for not only participating, but doing so and helping and really impacting individuals because of it. So thank you to each of you. To our viewers, thank you for tuning in. We hoped that you enjoyed this panel and learned more about graphic medicine. You can learn more about Fanbase Press at fanbasepress.com. We are on all of the social medias. And if you haven't already, go to the graphic medicine website, because I want to be the fifth person to plug graphic medicine, graphicmedicine.org. But again, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Hi, I'm Marielle.
And I'm Simon.
And we're from Blue Fox Comics. Founded in 2015, we've grown to become a successful publisher of distinct, character-driven, high-quality comics and graphic novels.
From slice of life through sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and many, many more, we have genres to suit everyone of all ages. All our titles can be found on our website, bluefoxcomics.com, in both physical and digital formats, with low-cost shipping worldwide from our base in Linlithgow, Scotland.
Blue Fox Comics are very proud to sponsor Fanbase Press's 2021 Virtual Celebrating Fandoms Week. Have a great day.